Joining me now is Pete Buttigieg. He is appearing in his personal capacity, not his official role as a member of the Biden administration. So I'm awkwardly not going to call you Mr. Secretary or Mayor. That's where we are. Great to be here. Thank you so much for being here with me this afternoon.
Thanks for having me in.
So I played that clip of Donald Trump saying in 4 years you won't have to vote again. I mean, he's made similar statements before. Governor Chris Sununu was on after you on Fox News this morning. He said it's just classic Trumpism. I think it's pretty important to call out. What did you think when you heard him say that?
Yeah, I mean, candidly, I don't completely understand what he means. I don't want to have to worry about what he means. It's yet another reason why we've got to make sure he doesn't get reelected. You know, I remember a few years ago, there were some commentators who sounded clever by saying, you know, the problem with Democrats is we were taking Trump literally when we should have taken him seriously, and the smart people were taking him seriously instead of taking him literally. But when he says something like that, or when he says something like wanting a political opponent like Liz Cheney, a congresswoman who criticized him, to be tried in a televised military tribunal, I don't know whether to take that literally or seriously. Either way, it's bad news.
Either way, if he's saying, I want to eliminate a system so nobody has to vote again, that's a huge problem, and we should take that both of those ways. So let me ask you, and this is the awkward question you've been answering a million times. I'm not going to ask you to tell me the status of the vetting process or whether you're going to be the vice president. I do want to know, because you've run for president yourself, you know Kamala Harris, you know Joe Biden, you've been around the system. What kind of qualities do you think would best complement her?
I mean, the bottom line is it's her call and she knows what she's doing. But what's great about this moment is there's an extraordinary bench of leaders in the Democratic Party, all of whom are doing everything we can to support the top of our ticket in Kamala Harris. And who knows what the exact flying formation is going to be like. But however that shakes out, I think you're going to see a lot of people pulling in this same direction in a party that, let's face it, is not always known for being extremely quick to get into alignment, to fall into line, as they say. But part of what's been remarkable about the last week, and I still can't believe that it's only been a week, is how quickly she coalesced our famously big tent party across all of its different corners to come together and rally to the cause of making sure she's the next president.
No question. I also think this process of having so many Democrats out is joyful. It's what reminds people of how a lot of people get into politics for good reason. So regardless of what happens, I know a lot of Democrats, people who watched you on Fox News this morning, would love to see you on the debate stage with J.D. Vance. There's no question about it. You've watched him. You've commented on him. What would you love to debate him about? What topics would you love to discuss with him?
Where do you start? I think, you know, they've selected somebody who has really reminded so many Americans of why they are off-put by the turn that the Republican Party has taken in the last few years. It's not just that he said a lot of things that are weird or insulting, like the characterization of, you know, the Democratic Party as childless cat ladies. It's also that he seems to view everything in terms of the negative. And what I mean by that is, for example, this thing about having children, I think a lot of us who have had kids would certainly say that experience opens you to a new way of thinking about the world. But he doesn't talk about it in those terms. He talks about how anybody who doesn't have kids is less than, that their perspectives have less value, which is just a really strange take. And it's not just a weird style that he brings. It's that this leads to weird policies, like his proposal that the number of votes you get in an election would be different depending on how many kids you have. I mean, I would think one person, one vote is a pretty basic, universally accepted principle in this country. But there's so many strange policy commitments he has. And so I guess what I would most want to see in that debate, whoever is at the table with him, is getting into that relationship between a strange worldview and a strange set of policies. Let's also remember his relationship to Project 2025. As you said, it's kind of amazing they put all this stuff out there.
Yeah, it's remarkable.
I think it's also telling that this is the first time I can remember that a comprehensive policy framework for a political party has been so profoundly unpopular that the president, the candidate of that party, has to pretend he's got nothing to do with it. Let's face it, it is definitely the roadmap for a future Trump administration. J.D. Vance, having him on the ticket, basically certifies that fact, because J.D. Vance wrote the foreword to the forthcoming book by the Heritage Foundation president. The Heritage Foundation is the institutional home of Project 2025, which means it's basically Project 2025, the book. So it couldn't be more on the nose in terms of revealing where a Trump presidency would take this country. And as Kamala Harris says so effectively, where it would take us is backward.
Yeah, I mean, and the head of the Heritage Foundation was tickled pink, had a smile across his face when J.D. Vance was named. So let me ask you about messaging, because you're a deeply substantive, I mean, nerdy in the best way possible guy, but you're also very good at speaking in accessible language. And I think you just mentioned strange, weird. We've seen Tim Walz, the vice president, others use weird. This has kind of been an evolution a little bit in messaging over the past week, which I think is good and effective. Why do you think speaking about Trump and Vance and the threat in that language works?
Well, I think because it demonstrates that this is not just a traditional Democrats versus Republicans debate or argument. We could go back and forth all day on a more progressive worldview versus a more conservative worldview. But the stuff that you're seeing out of Trump and Vance isn't just conservative. In fact, sometimes it's as offensive to conservative ideas as it is to liberal ideas. This talk about terminating the Constitution, the deep weirdness of having somebody who wants to be president of the United States rambling about electrocuting sharks and Hannibal Lecter. And I think it reminds us of just the choice we face, not just in terms of policies, direction for the country, which is hugely important, of course, but also a choice in terms of what it's going to feel like to live in this country. I don't want to worry about sharks that often, or think about Hannibal Lecter too often, or any of the just kind of dark and twisted things that were kind of shoved in our face all of the time during the Trump presidency and ever since by the Trump campaign. And I think we have a chance to have just a better, brighter future. That's what I love about this contrast. Look, don't get me wrong. We all know what we're up against and the gravity of what would happen to our democracy as well as our economy if there was a chance for Trump to return to power. But this isn't just about what we're trying to block. It's about what we're working to build. And I think that energy is part of what's been so remarkable and so central in these recent days on the campaign trail.
Yeah, unquestionably. Politics should be joyful. I think it's so important. And I just want to ask you about how Democrats could kind of reclaim this freedom and liberty. She's starting to do it. How could they reclaim the freedom and liberty mantle from Republicans?
Yeah, this is something I've believed in for a long time. Going back to when I was running, I thought it was really important to talk more in terms of freedom because, people get freedom. Yes, it's important to make sure that people are free from overbearing government, which is the thing that conservatives have traditionally talked about the most. But also, government is not the only thing that can make you unfree. And good government helps make sure you're free from other threats to your well-being. The Affordable Care Act made people more free because you didn't have to be in fear of what would happen if you had a medical event. It's important, I think, to keep people free from fear of gun violence, which is why we're the ones who are out there saying the most important thing we have to do to protect our kids isn't to ban a bunch of books. It's to make sure that assault weapons aren't finding their way into neighborhoods or, God forbid, schools. And there's a real opportunity now, I think, to embrace that even further because Trump's Republican Party has walked away from freedom. I mean, again, if you're talking about military tribunals for political opponents, you have no business talking about freedom. If you're into banning books, you have no business letting a word like liberty escape your lips. And so I think this is a really smart thing to do. First of all, I think just philosophically makes sense, and it's who we are, and that's who she is. But I also think it's smart because it can appeal to something that I think a lot of independents, a lot of what I like to call future former Republicans, continue to sincerely care about and are increasingly concerned that it is at risk. And of course, Exhibit A is a woman's freedom to choose and access to abortion care, a freedom that Donald Trump withdrew when he destroyed the right to choose in this country. And I think it's important, since every election is about the future, not just to remind everybody that that happened, but to talk about what happens next when you have somebody like a Trump-Vance ticket and a Republican Party that does not support the freedom to grow your family through IVF. They do not support a lot of reproductive freedoms, access to contraception. They don't even support my freedom to marry, going by how most Republicans voted when that was on the floor. So I think it's a powerful framework. I think, yes, it's smart for the campaign, but it's also just fitting because that's very much what's at stake right now.
Yeah, I mean, no question about it. And it's such an important, you don't have to leave the framing with the other side. That's not how it has to go. I know you've talked about this for a long time. Let me ask you, a lot of people see, you've been asked 1,000 times about whether you're going to be the vice presidential running mate, all these things, your future. I know from working for a lot of politicians that you talk about those things with your family and you consider a lot of things. I mean, you have little kids. You're happily married. You're in Michigan a lot of the time. How do you have that conversation? You're young. You love policy. You love politics. How do you guys talk about that and what you want to do in the future?
Yeah, I mean, any decision about what to do next is a family decision. And, I remember I got into politics as a young, single mayor. And,
Life's different now, huh?
It really is.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw people say that on TV who had families, but I didn't really understand it. Now I do. I mean, the contributions and the sacrifices that my husband Chasten makes, that our children make, even though they're about to be 3, they may not know it, but they are helping to make it possible for me to serve. And that's a really big deal and a heavy thing and not something to be done lightly. And of course, it works both ways. On one hand, anytime you consider a demanding job, certainly a demanding role in politics and public life, you think twice about it because there's a cost. On the other hand, having kids, having a family has helped me to better appreciate what's at stake in this election. I think about, again, the simple fact that our marriage and family, that's the most important thing in my life, exists by the grace of a single vote on the Supreme Court. But I also, of course, think about our kids. Our kids, I hope and expect, will be around for the 22nd century. And so if I'm trying to make sure that we make good decisions and elect good leaders and reinforce what is best about this country going into the balance of this century so that it goes well all the way into the next, they are going to be holding us accountable for that. I'm already, they're not quite 3. I'm already at the stage of why. And I've realized I've got like 4 or 5 whys before I'm out of answers, right? I mean, the most basic questions, like, why? And soon those questions will evolve into deeper questions about what we who are in positions of responsibility right now have done to make sure that they are safer from gun violence, to make sure that they grow into an economy that's fairer, to make sure that they grow up into a climate that supports and sustains their well-being. To me now, when we talk about good climate choices, it's not about saving some abstract thing called the planet. It's about them. It's about making sure they are personally and materially better off. So, I think that just opens up in a different way, and it propels me to do this work, even though it's also reminded me just how much more there is to life